Seeing through the illusions. Truth. Seeing through the illusions, truth, power, and the shape of human experience. The universe, taken as the totality of everything that exists, doesn't fit neatly into our ordinary ideas of cause and effect. We ask what caused the universe, but that question may be misplaced from the start. It's a bit like asking what's north of the North Pole. The structure of the question assumes a framework that may not apply. In everyday life, we think we observe causality directly, but we don't. We only see that one event is regularly followed by another. Event A is followed by event B again and again, and we infer a connection. But the connection itself is never directly observed. It is assumed, not seen. If that's true, then the idea that the universe must have a cause begins to lose its force. It becomes less a necessary truth and more a habit of thought. And once that assumption is questioned, many traditional metaphysical arguments begin to weaken. What remains is not certainty, but something closer to philosophical humility. Perhaps the universe does not require explanation in the way we expect. Perhaps it simply is. And if that is unsatisfying, it may be because we are demanding from reality a kind of structure it does not owe us. The absence of a final explanation is not necessarily a flaw in existence. It may simply be the condition of existence itself. This shift in perspective is not new. In the 20th century, logical positivism pushed a radical version of this idea. It argued that many of the traditional statements of philosophy and religion are not false, but meaningless. Claims such as God exists or the soul is immortal were, under this view, neither true nor false. They were not genuine statements at all. For a proposition to be meaningful, it had to be verifiable through experience or derivable through logic. If it could not be observed, measured, or deduced, then it did not belong to knowledge. It belonged instead to confusion. From this perspective, metaphysics dissolves into what critics called linguistic delirium, language spinning without grounding. Philosophy's task is not to speculate about invisible realms, but to clarify what we actually mean when we speak. Its job is to clean up confusion, not multiply it. While this strict version of verificationism has softened over time, its influence remains. Not everything that matters can be neatly verified, but not everything that can be said is meaningful either. Thought still requires discipline, and part of that discipline is the willingness to admit when language breaks down. This tension becomes even sharper when we turn to religion. Religion is often treated as a system of belief, but it can also be understood as a psychological structure. It provides meaning, order, and emotional stability in a world that often feels unpredictable and threatening. In this sense, God can be understood less as a literal being and more as a projection of human need, an idealized figure combining protection, justice, authority, and care. Religion organizes anxiety into narrative form. It gives shape to uncertainty. But what it offers in comfort, it may also take away in clarity. If belief becomes too strong, it can reduce the urgency of confronting reality as it is. Religion, then, can function as a kind of collective illusion, not in the sense of madness, but in the sense of structured wishful thinking. This is not a critique of believers. It is an attempt to understand why belief takes the forms it does and what emotional needs it serves. The question is not whether religion is bad or good, but what role it plays in human life. From this perspective, maturity does not mean having final answers. It means learning to live without them. There are no guarantees built into existence. Science, for all its limits, offers a more disciplined way of engaging with uncertainty, not because it explains everything, but because it refuses to pretend when it does not. Letting go of metaphysical certainty does not remove meaning from life. It changes where meaning comes from. Instead of being received from above, meaning becomes something constructed from within human experience itself. This question of meaning becomes especially sharp when we confront suffering. Suffering does not seem to arrive with explanation. It is not clearly punishment, reward, or lesson. It simply occurs. Attempts to justify suffering often risk becoming forms of denial. They impose narrative structure onto something that may not contain it. One way to understand suffering is through desire itself. We suffer because we want, and wanting has no final endpoint. Satisfaction is always temporary, always replaced by new lack. In that sense, suffering is not accidental but structural. It is built into the movement of life itself. Another perspective sees the world as indifferent, neither concerned with meaning nor organized around human expectations. In both cases, the result is similar. There is no guaranteed explanation. The mistake may be the demand that suffering must mean something, but if it does not, that does not leave us empty. It leaves us free to respond without illusion. Meaning, then, is not discovered inside suffering. It is created in relation to it. This same tension appears in morality. Moral relativism challenges the idea that there is a single universal system of right and wrong. Instead, it argues that moral values are shaped by culture, history, language, and social structure. What is considered just in one society may be condemned in another. No single cultural framework holds absolute authority. This does not mean that morality disappears or that all actions become equal. It means that moral judgment is always situated. This creates a difficult problem. If all values are contextual, how do we criticize practices that seem clearly harmful, violence, oppression, or systemic injustice? Relativism forces us to confront the tension between cultural understanding and ethical evaluation. At its best, it does not end moral reasoning, it deepens it. It transforms ethics into dialogue between perspectives rather than obedience to a single authority. But it also removes the comfort of certainty. A similar tension exists in politics, especially in democracy. Democracy is often described as the rule of the people, but in practice it is shaped by structures of influence that are not evenly distributed. Media, wealth, and institutional power all affect what counts as public opinion. Voting exists, but often within limits already shaped by elites and systems of control. The issue is not the idea of democracy itself, but its real-world operation. When information is distorted and inequality shapes participation, democracy risks becoming symbolic rather than real. What appears as freedom can mask constraint. Real democratic life would require not only voting rights, but access to truth, genuine equality of influence, and the ability to critically engage with systems of power. Without that, democracy becomes a performance of participation rather than participation itself. Time itself reveals a similar split between appearance and experience. There is clock time, measurable, linear, external, and there is lived time, subjective, emotional, and fluid. We do not experience time as a sequence of identical units, but as a flow shaped by memory, attention, and anticipation. Science can measure time, but it cannot capture what it feels like to live through it. Philosophy, if it is to remain close to experience, must take this inner dimension seriously. Time is not only a feature of the universe, it is also a structure of consciousness. Freedom, too, is often misunderstood. We like to think of ourselves as free, but radical freedom carries a heavy burden. Without destiny, divine guidance, or fixed essence, we are responsible for what we become. Every choice belongs to us, including the choice not to choose. This creates anxiety because it removes excuses. Faced with that responsibility, many people turn toward systems that reduce uncertainty, authority, tradition, belief. But freedom cannot be escaped without cost. To be free is to live without guarantees. It is difficult, but it is also the condition for self-creation. We do not discover who we are, we become it through action. The same logic extends to crime and law. Crime is often treated as individual failure, but it can also be understood as a social phenomenon shaped by structural conditions. Societies define crime, and societies often produce the conditions in which it arises. Inequality, exclusion, and lack of opportunity do not excuse behavior, but they help explain patterns. Crime, in this sense, reflects the structure of the society that produces it. Law itself is often presented as neutral justice, but it can also be seen as institutionalized power. A law does not need to be just to function, it only needs to be recognized within a system. Justice often arrives after the fact, as justification for structures already in place. The question becomes not only what is legal, but whose interests legality serves. This leads to a more direct view of politics. Virtue alone is not enough. Ethical intention without power remains abstract. To shape reality, intention must be able to act within it. Power is not automatically corrupt. It is necessary. Without it, even the most ethical vision remains unrealized. The challenge is not to reject power, but to understand how it can be used responsibly, bridging moral ideals and practical reality. Culture itself reflects this same tension. It teaches us how to live, but it also constrains what is considered normal. It forms us, but also normalizes us. To see culture clearly is to recognize both its creative and its limiting force. Modern reason, once celebrated as liberation from superstition, has also become a mechanism of control. What began as critique became calculation. Philosophy became management. Reason narrowed into efficiency, productivity, and administration. At its extreme, rational systems can operate without ethical reflection, producing outcomes that are technically ordered but morally catastrophic. The danger is not reason itself, but reason stripped of critique and empathy. The task is not to abandon reason, but to reclaim it. Reason must again include questioning, imagination, and ethical reflection. It must ask not only how things work, but whether they should. Art reflects a similar transformation. It once aimed to express truth in a direct or symbolic form. Over time, it becomes more self-aware, more fragmented, more experimental. Rather than presenting truth as complete, modern art often breaks itself apart. This is not its death, but its evolution. Art no longer claims totality. It becomes a broken mirror, still reflecting, but no longer pretending to contain everything. Finally, truth itself must be questioned. Truth is often treated as neutral, but it is always expressed through language, and language involves selection, hierarchy, and exclusion. What can be said is shaped by what cannot. When truth is presented as absolute, it can function as authority. It can silence alternative perspectives by defining them as invalid. The violence of truth is not only in falsehood, but in the power to define what counts as truth in the first place. Recognizing this does not mean abandoning truth. It means refusing to worship it. Truth should remain open to challenge, revision, and dialogue. Because when truth cannot be questioned, it stops being truth and becomes power with a different name. In the end, what runs through all of this is a single tension. The systems we rely on to understand the world, reason, culture, law, science, religion, truth itself, both reveal reality and shape it. They make experience intelligible, but they also limit what can be seen. Philosophy, at its best, is not about escaping this tension. It is about seeing it clearly. And in that clarity, something important remains. Not certainty, but awareness. Not final answers, but the ability to see through the structures that shape what we take for granted. That may not resolve everything, but it may be enough to begin thinking and living more freely within it.